First of all, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming and for joining. To those of the Chaver that were with us the past couple of shiurim, for Baruch Hashem, the new faces, I want to make it very, very clear. As you look around the room, Baruch Hashem, you see diversity. And that, my friends, is exactly what this Chabura is about. Because this Chabura is not about learning a specific thing. This Chabura is about what the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh brought to the world. And what he brought to the world is that there's no such thing as a young Jew or an old Jew, and there's no such thing as a leftist Jew and a rightist Jew. There's such a thing as a Yid. That's it, without any labels, just the Jew himself. And the more authentic that we're able to get with ourselves, and the deeper we're able to go, the more we're able to reveal that Jewishness that we contain, which we soon realize to be the Jewishness that all of us contain, because we're all sparks of one collective soul. And it's only the body that gives us the illusion and casts us under the delusion of experiencing ourselves as a separate entity. But the truth is, mamash, this room is not full of people. This room, al kol be'asara shchinta sharia, and every 10 Jews, the Shechina descends. This room is filled with the one spirit of Knesset Yisrael, of that collective soul of the Jewish nation, as it rests within different vessels, but it's one thing. So there's no such thing. Some of the Chaver were saying, I thought I'm too young for the shiur. Some, nobody said they're too old, Chas v'shalom, but just too young for the shiur. And I say, mamish, there's no such thing. There's mamish no such thing. If you're a person that's looking to grow, if you're a person that's looking to get into the depth of Yiddishkeit and not just to do things on the surface, like it's so easy to fall into that mechanical trap, this is the Chabur for you. No matter who you are, no matter what you look like, it makes no difference. That is what we're about. And so, to be able to look around and to see this is just the most beautiful thing in the world. And Kadosh Baruch Hu has so much nachas from it, because this is how Yiddishkeit should be. At least I think. Let's jump into it. B'siyata d'shmaya. Okay. Let's take a look at the EILECHA'S Sefas Emes, Sefas Emes, toward the end of Parshas Bereshis. To those chaver that have been with us for the previous shiur, you're going to note that this is a little bit different style of a shiur, because we went very with a pedal to the metal, very strong, very big, very lofty. It's still going to be big and lofty, but I was thinking maybe a little bit less content and a little bit more focus to allow these concepts to really seep in very strongly. With Hashem's help, la'at, step by step, I can promise every week will be like this, because I'm an erratic individual, Baruch Hashem, and so whatever I'm feeling in the moment, that's Be'ezer Hashem, what I hope is right to be learning together. Says the EILECHA'S Sefas Emes b'medrash vayechal elikim b'yom hashvi'i, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu completed all of His work on the 7th day. Ma haya olam chaser. So what was lacking? If HaKadosh Baruch Hu finished everything He needed to make, what was missing? And the paradoxical answer is, well, rest was missing, because all HaKadosh Baruch Hu had done was work. What's missing? Menucha. Say Chazal, ha'olam chaser menucha, the world was lacking rest. Ba'asa Shabbos, when Shabbos came, nigmara hamalacha, kamashikasav Rashi, as Rashi brings, ba Shabbos, ba menucha. When Shabbos came to the world, rest came to the world. Amazing thing. Ha'inyan, says the Sefas Emes, the deepest truth of what this means is as follows. Ki be'emes, the truth is, ha'olam nikra al shem ha'helem. We refer to the world in Hebrew with the word olam, ha'olam. But the truth is that even this world, olam, which means world, this word, olam, world, has a root that means something different. We find that root in the word he'elem, which means hiddenness, concealment. Olam means a world, but the shoresh is related to the concept of hiding, covering over, concealing. He'elem. Why? I'll be pshat, and that was one of the questions we said. Why is the world called olam related to the word he'elem, to hide? I think on the most basic of levels, it's because the way that we're ordinarily taught to perceive the world is that the world hides Hashem, right? Physicality hides HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we should really be experiencing Hashem's presence and really be holding on to the belief and to the perception that there's a God in the world. But what can you do? The world gets in the way. Elokim becomes gematria, ha-teva, nature, and nature masks the creator of heaven and earth. That's the normal, ordinary way that we're taught to understand the connectivity between the word oilam and he'elam. Says the Sefas Emes, mamish punkt verkehrt in Yiddish, the opposite. Mamish the opposite. Look at what he says here. He says, you know why the world is called he'elam? Shehateva mechase pnimius chiyas elokus. Because the world contains within it an inner spark of divine vitality. It's not that the world hides HaKadosh Baruch Hu and therefore the world is called Olam, He'elam. It's that God is hidden in the world. And that's why the world is called Olam, He'elam. Can you hear the difference? Two very different things. On the one hand, the first way of looking at it, the world is a barrier. The world is that which is hiding Hashem. What can you do? We have to get rid of the world so that we can strip away the curtain and see the Wizard of Oz, you know? We can see HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says this Sefas Emes, mamish no. He says the world is not in our way. The world is the vehicle through which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is able to reveal himself by putting on this costume we call nature. Very different way of looking at things. This Torah alone from the Baal Shem Tov, even though it's from the Sefas Emes, but it's all the Baal Shem Tov. Any Torah you'll find in the thousands of Sifrei Chasidus with tens of thousands, perhaps maybe millions and millions of pages, with all the different ideas and different psukim and ramazim and different levels of understanding, they all come to say one thing. It's all one essential thing. That's why it's a little bit frustrating, some people, that they think Hasidus is like a cute Dvar Torah that you open a Sefas Emes, you prepare something to say for like somebody's Sheva Brachas, and it's like a nice remez, and it's cute, it's Chasidish, Chasidish Pshat. They're mamish, I cannot tell you how people are missing the boat. Mamish can't tell you. And I mean that literally, because Hasidus is a boat. More specifically, it's the Tevas Noach. Mamish Tevas Noach, in a world that's filled with so much, I don't want to say tuma because that's already the way that other people, in a world that's filled with bilbulim, with confusion, in a world that's filled with fog and with darkness, specifically here, full of rain and clouds and challenges. Chasidus is a beacon, it's a mamish, a lighthouse. And if all you see when you see Chasidus is a nice little Torah that you can chuckle because you read it and you can tell it to your friend, and they'll say, it's a Chasidish Pshat. I don't want to say what happened to the people that weren't in the Tevas Noach. Nebuch. And it's not a matter of judgment looking down. Nebuch people just don't know. They're not taught how to learn Hasidus, what the purpose of Hasidus is. We talked before about different vessels for one substance. Every paragraph in Hasidus is maybe a different vessel for one essential revelation. And this piece particularly perhaps speaks to the Iker Nukuda that's at the core of everything else as it unravels, which is this world is a revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not perhaps, as the classical conception sees it, as maybe a hallway to Olam Haba, and that's where everything is, and we just sort of have to suffer through this world and do mitzvahs we don't really care about, and sort of have to keep halach either because we're guilted out of it or because we're trying to get schar or whatever. All these are nice, cute things. They're good. They're sweet. They're holy, and they have their place. Hasidus came to say every minute of life is a portal to paradise if you can look at it with the right eyes. A mitzvah is not about the schar you'll get for the mitzvah, but as all the tzaddikim say, schar mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. Not that Hashem will give you another mitzvah to do, but that if we can really get into the depth of what the mitzvahs are, of course we don't like the mitzvahs. Of course we struggle with them sometimes, because we haven't the foggiest idea of what the meaning should be. So why in a modern age of 2022, when everything has to be exactly aligned with our understanding, how should we have any feeling for these black boxes that we put on and wrap and strap? And not that we don't do them. If we do them, we don't do them, we do them. But how should we develop a feeling of them, a feeling for them? So the Baal Shem Tov saves our life by teaching us that if you have the right perspective, it's the same world as everybody else sees. It's the same foggy rain as everybody else. You could pashut be living in a different universe, legamre. And the same is true, and this was the Baal Shem Tov's Chiddush and what scared so many people, I think. The same is true for Yiddishkeit itself. Not just about the world. It's not that there are two kinds of living, one kind of living that's secular and one kind of living that's religious. The Baal Shem Tov didn't suffice for that because he didn't buy it. Because the Baal Shem Tov was an Ish Emes. And the Baal Shem Tov said there are two kinds of religious Jews, not two kinds of Jews. There are two kinds of religious Jews. Like Yeshayahu HaNavi already said before him. There are Yidden that are cultural, traditional Yidden, and they're doing everything right in the Nefesh HaChaim. Thank you Hashem for the Nefesh HaChaim, who came to the world to say even the most mindless mitzvah still has its place and it changes the world. Emes. But the Baal Shem Tov says, why shouldn't we strive for a lechatchila? Why should we suffice with a b'diavad? How beautiful a b'diavad might be, but there's a lechatchila way of living. There's ani l'doidi v'doidi li. There's a Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us Yiddishkeit, not as a list of things he needs us to do, but he wants a relationship with us. He's yearning for us, for mamish us. He wants a connection, he wants a togetherness. So the Baal Shem Tov says there's a different kind of Jew. And these two kinds of Jews are so dissimilar, are so distant from one another, that even though on the outside you come to shul and you see them sitting next to each other, and one's putting on tefillin and the other one's putting on tefillin, different oilamos ligamre. Different world. Different world. Says the Sefas Emes, this world every minute could be the greatest revelation of a Kodesh Baruch Hu if we begin to shift our perspectives. If we begin to shift the way in which we look at things, perceive things, expect things to be, the lens through which we look at the world can change. And when that happens, it's a different world entirely. Back inside. Uve Emes, says the Sefas Emes, kol habriya, the whole entire creation, hayarak l'chvayda yizbarach shemai, was only for the glory of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The whole creation itself, not to mask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it was created, kol mash HaKadosh Baruch Hu bara ba'olamei, Chazal say in a number of places, eina bara ela l'chvayda, he created everything for his glory. But the word glory is a very poor translation of kavod. Kavod means a lot of things. And when you start to learn a little bit Pnimius, which hopefully we're learning together, and we're gonna week by week, we're gonna become familiar with this whole kind of looking at the world, which people are so desperately in need of. You're gonna learn that every word has so many different facets, so many different levels, means so many different things. So the word kavod is, on a literal level, translated as glory, honor. But the truth is that the word kavod is always linked, without getting into the whole depth of it now, to the sphera of malchus, to that divine energy that we've been talking about really for the past couple of weeks, David HaMelech, everything that malchus is, the moon, everything we spoke about, without getting into that now. And malchus is synonymous with the Shekhinah, with the indwelling presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So if kavod is linked to malchus, and malchus is linked to the Shekhinah, then it would also be appropriate to translate kavod as presence. Presence. What does the word presence mean? It means two things. There is the fact of a person's being present, that we call his presence, right? We are in his presence. You're here and we're together. That's called presence. That's one kind of presence. But the word presence has another meaning that means something entirely different, which is when we talk about a person as having presence. Right? You ever heard that way of talking? You say, now this person has presence. What does that mean when we say that a person has presence? Not that a person is present, and then we talk about that as his presence. What do we mean when we say that a particular person, has presence? I think it means that even before the person says anything or does anything, maybe even before you see him enter a room, there's a hergish, there's a feeling that the person gives off, even without saying or doing anything. His presence can be felt. And it's like an independent entity from the person himself. V'haraya, if I'm at a wedding and someone very, very holy walks in, the mood shifts, the atmosphere changes. That person has presence. Didn't do anything. He didn't juggle, and he's not like, didn't do anything remarkable that people should start to crowd around. There's an energy in the room that's different. That person has presence. This is a completely different way of looking at this thing we call the Shekhinah. Because we translate the Shekhinah as divine presence. But everybody translates it in the first connotation of presence, which means God's being present. But the tzaddikim teach that there's a completely different way of understanding the Shekhinah and therefore Hashem's kavod. It's not Hashem's being present that we're referring to. It's the sense that we can feel. When we're walking down the street late at night, it's like an inner shudder. It's just a whisper. It's not anything we can explain or capture in words. We sense that we're not alone. It's a sense that we feel that Hashem has presence, and even though He's not present in the sense of being apparent to us, so we can point our finger yet and say, Ze Elokeinu, that's going to come that day. But we can sense that we're not alone in the room. There's another consciousness, there's another being that's present. And that has presence. That's called the Shekhinah, the divine presence. It's just a feeling. It's a feeling.
Are the two not linked?
They certainly are linked.
Meaning, when you say someone, you feel a presence because someone is there. So
right.
The way we look at Hashem is that He's here everywhere around us.
Yes, but there are two kinds of presence in the sense of the first kind of understanding, right? Because the first kind of understanding is that the person's presence can be explained. We understand He's mamish here, He's physically here. That's the kind of presence that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will hopefully express. Lasad lava, Yumala Ards Deus Hashem Kamayim Li'amachasam, as we'll see. We have a lot to cover. We're getting caught up.
The second way, not just an invisible way one. If
yes.
I see around, or am I missing?
You're not, no, mamish not. You're getting exactly the nakuda. Of course, a person cannot have a sense of presence without his being present, but it's an extension beyond the first understanding, where we don't need to be seeing the person. We can't explain what we're feeling, but we get a hierarchy. Of course the person needs to be there, or else how do we know that that person has presence somewhere else?
It's like shochen.
Shachen?
It's like shochen, like a neighbor. That's what
Ooh, wow, beautiful.
He's there, but you don't necessarily have to speak to the neighbor if the neighbor's there.
Your neighbor's there.
No?
Absolutely. And that awareness of the neighbor being there pervades a lot of our decisions. Even though you don't consult them, you know you have a neighbor.
That's the root. That's
Excellent. Beautiful. Yeah.
The kvedos, the heaviness, that's the nakuda of the mitzvah tzarishim yeshmaim, the yordin, malachim yordin. So what you're bringing down into this world. When the tzaddik walks into the room, he affects the room because what he represents is not just a man with a beard, but a divine principle that he's bringing down.
A channel.
A heaviness. I know it's like not cool to be heavy, but there is a value in being heavy. It's like, take this serious. Like, there's something that matters.
There's gravity. Even the word gravity we use in these two ways. Gravity means gravity, but we also refer to a situation that situation had right, this matter holds gravity, or however we say it. But this is otonukuda. That is gonna. I don't want to get into that because that's gonna open up that matter and matters.
Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, this is awesome. So I'm just like, I read a whole book of the Hebrew, the English bechinas, like matter and matters. Right? So I'm just a little bit nervous of going down this road right now because it's an important thing we need to talk about, the tzaddik, the concept of the tzaddik. But this is the sum total of that conversation. People also misunderstand what the tzaddik is. Like, why are you tzaddik worshiping? Why are you, pictures on the wall and this and that? Like, what's the big deal? Go straight to God. We'll have that discussion, Be'ezer Hashem, in the context of Shabbos, because Shabbos is also a reference to the tzaddikim, because the Zohar Kodesh says that they used to refer to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai as Shabbos. That's how they would talk about him. Ant Shabbos de Kuli Yomin. So we'll get to that. La'at. But we do have to move because we have a lot to get to. Ube Emes, he says, Kol Habriya Hayarak L'chvoida Yizbarach Shemai. The world is created not to conceal Hashem, but to enable HaKadosh Baruch Hu to hide, so to speak, within a vessel that can serve as a vehicle to enable us to feel His presence. That's a very different way of looking at the world. It's a very different way of looking at nature. That's a life-giving way of looking at the world. The world doesn't hide Hashem. The world is nothing to be done away with, or to stamp on, or to despise. This world is the greatest portal to the divine, if engaged with the right consciousness. Rak, he says, there was an issue. Because of the nature of our separateness from Hashem, splintered pieces of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, chelik al-kamimal, that becomes different consciousnesses, different souls. And Hashem needed us in a seemingly separate world so that there could be bechira, and so that we could really come into a relationship with Him that's not forced in any way, but it's one that we choose. In addition to every other reason that Hashem needed bechira, without getting into that now. He says it would have been impossible for us to really be able to perceive Hashem if not for nature, if not for creation. So it turns out that, as all the Mekubalim say, and Arizal says, and Rabbi Nachman says, and the Tzaddikim say, that the concealment is the revelation. Hashem's act of concealing Himself was in fact the greatest act of revealing Himself. Because specifically through concealing Himself in nature, now we have a chance as human beings to be able to touch the divine, as it were, through this vehicle. It's very, very analogous to a person who's walking outside and the sun is shining so incredibly powerfully that the person can't possibly look up at the sun. So what does he do? This crazy thing, it would seem counterintuitive. To enable him to see the sun, he blocks his eyes with black lenses. How does that work? Sunglasses. What's the nakuda? Because on the one hand, it's the greatest concealment. You're covering your eyes with black. But on the other hand, that's not the point. The point is not blocking out the sun. The point is filtering the sun in a way that now you can perceive it. So certainly it's a level of concealment, but it's only for the sake of revelation. So he says, certainly there was a tzimtzum, certainly there was a contraction, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which we'll learn by Ezra Hashem, started the whole creation by, so to speak, drawing Himself out from the center point of infinity, which is of course a paradoxical concept. You can speak about that. The Ramchal actually explains what that means in Adar B'Amarim. It begins with a vacuum. It begins with a void. And that void seems to be midas hadin. What's HaKadosh Baruch Hu doing? Where are you going? Why are you removing yourself? To make space for creation. And the answer is, don't you get it? It's the deepest rachamim in the world. It's the deepest mercy. Because only through this kind of setup or layout do we have a chance of being able to be margish, be able to feel Hashem. Not despite creation, specifically because of creation. Rakshi efshar, he continues, efshar lahakir es habaris baruch shemay rak al yidei tzimtzum hateva. So we needed nature, val yidei maisav yichaylim lahakir esai. And then through the way in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world, such an amazing way. So then we have hope of being able to recognize that there's a God in the world. But there needs to be bechira. And so of course there needs to be the opportunity for us to fall into the trap of not developing these eyes and starting to see the world as teva, it's just nature. But I have news to break for you, to break to you. We presume that if we were to live in the realm of the spiritual world and the malachim and things like this, certainly we would be aware that there's Hashem and we would be conscious of godliness all the time. I believe very strongly that if a baby were to be born, some crazy way, a fluke, it comes out the wrong pipe, whatever, to be born into the olam of Yitzira, let's say, I say that in 20 years he would also be walking around the olam of Yitzira saying, "Where's Hashem? Where's Hashem?" I see all these like angels around, like where's proof of God? Where's the divine? Because who told you that putting a seed into the ground, covering it up with earth, pouring water on it, exposing it to sunlight, and then it taking root and beginning to grow is not the greatest revelation of godliness there is? Who told you? Who told you that that's a thing called nature? Nobody. But we get used to it. Doesn't mean that essentially it's less miraculous. Who told you that there's these things called eyes that enable us to consciously perceive through vision everything around us? Like that's a given. I wake up and I open my eyes in the morning because, of course, I'm a human being and I have eyes. Who said that that's not a nes nigle? Mamash a nes nigle. That we have ears and we can communicate and we can build and we can dream and we can hope and we can experience life. And the world unfolds around us. Who said that that's not the divine himself? So everybody's waiting to hear a message from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Hashem is saying, don't you understand? It's not a matter of me speaking any louder than I'm speaking. It's a matter of you turning your radio station tuner to the right channel. It's a subjective blockage, not an objective one. Hashem is the sun, shining all the time the same. The question is whether the moon, which we learned last week, is turning itself into enough of a vessel to reflect the light of the sun, to turn toward the light of the sun, to be able to develop the eyes and the perspective that will mamish enable a person to walk through this natural world and to feel mamish that you're walking through Elokus Kipshutai. It's the same Brent Street, it's the same Hendon we say, it's the same streets that everybody else is walking. You can mamish be walking a tefach hoich, off the ground, with feet on the ground. You can be in this world and not be here. You could be a teenager with the rest of your chevra and be different, lechalutin, absolutely, completely. You can be at the office with everybody else. Your heart is dancing. You're not falling for the ruse, for the trick, for the deception that 99.9% of the world falls for. You soar beyond. You soar beyond. And mainly you avoid pitfalls of frustrations and stupidities. And this one said that one, and what's this one going to think? So lo manyenoti. So lo manyenoti. Because I'm not a person with a name and with a body. Because I'm an neshama that lives in this container I call a guf. For the purpose of being able to perceive the godliness that's hidden within this thing we call nature. So I don't have time to worry about shtuyot. I don't have time for it. Because every minute of life is a mission. And it's the chevra like us that are connected to the Mayan, which we were learning about before. Shemit, the Mayan Apnimius, with a stream that's flowing out of the Beis Medrash of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh. In as much as we feel it's changing our lives, we need to become torchbearers. There are thousands of people that are desperate for what we are learning. Desperate. The neshamas are parched. And that's why I say so strongly again and again, not because I need more people by my shiur, but because more people need to hear the Torah that we're sharing together. And so each and every one of us becomes an ambassador the minute that we stand up and begin to identify with what we're learning. Instead of saying this is some nice information that we're learning, an interesting perspective. It's not a perspective. It's not another Dvar Torah. It's a different way of being a Jew. And it's as different from everything else, and I say this specifically and precisely, as exile is from redemption. It's as different. A sense of achrayus, a sense of gratitude. What a privilege, what a schus. Can't tell you enough, what a privilege. Undeserved. Deserved because we know we're undeserving. That's how we come to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu al yidei hester gufei, and through the concealment in and of itself, nimsa hakaras alikusi is baruch shemai. That's where you begin to sense HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence, not despite the world, because of the world. Because the world is not here to hide Hashem. The world has Hashem hidden within it. And developing these kinds of eyes of faith, where it's not just a belief that there's a God somewhere up there, and He created this world, and He cares about this world, which is all beautiful, and of course it's part of the animamens. It's much more than that. Hashem is not present in the way that there's a God, Hashem Echad. It's that if there's a Hashem Echad, and we're experiencing the revelation of that Hashem Echad in a way that we could handle it, then that means that this whole world of multiplicity, which seems to be scattered with so many broken pieces of so many millions of different things, and Eish, Ruach, Mayim, and Afar, all the four elements, and Doimim, Tzameach, Chaim, and Daber, all the four different categories of creation, that's all Echad also. Hashem Echad means the world is Echad. Because if you can look beyond the facade and begin to find the inner spark within every experience, everything is one. Everything becomes an encounter with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and this of course was the Baal Shem Tov's big push, founded on the pasuk B'chol drachecha, in all of your different ways, whether you're at work, whether you're at home, your relationships, varied as they may be, in your religious life, in your quote-unquote secular life, in your on time and in your off time, in your ups and in your downs. B'chol drachecha da'ehu. You can come to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And not just come to know Him, but the word da'ehu is related to the word das. That's its shirish, and the word das means intimacy. Because it's not just about knowing intellectually there's a God in the world and having it as a concept. It's about swimming in it experientially. Da'ehu is intimacy, the closest thing there is. And that the fact that there's HaKadosh Baruch Hu that's revealing Himself in the silence of this room becomes louder to me than all the noise that so many of us are wrapped up in so much of the time. Different way of living. V'ha-Shabbos, he says. V'ha-Shabbos hu hakaras elikus. What's Shabbos all about? Shabbos is a gigantic launch pad for this kind of living. That's what Shabbos is. Because on Shabbos, so much of the distracting parts of creation that during the week can cast us into this kind of perception where we think we're making parnasa, and we see cause and effect, and the cause is usually things we think we're doing, and then the effect is something we think we earned or deserve, and that's the world because we're just, our responsibilities and obligations. Shabbos says, I'm not taking you out of this world, because we still eat and we drink, and Adarabah, Shabbos is a time for oneg physically. But Shabbos is just a reminder for one day a week, do nothing. Do nothing. But hopefully, be conscious that you're a bit of a puppet. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a bit of a puppet master. And Shabbos, I look back on the week and I say, wow, I thought I did all those things. There's only one God in the world. And I'm just a little bit of a channel, as all of us are, for that which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is bringing to the world through us. Shabbos is the launch pad for this kind of perception of Hashem. Shu tachlis habriya, which is the ultimate purpose of this thing we call nature. V'nikra, and that's why Shabbos is called tachlis ma'aseh shamayim va'aretz. It is the ultimate purpose of heaven and earth. Shabbos is. What does that mean? Shabbos is the purpose of heaven and earth. Well, Shabbos comes last in creation, so maybe everything was leading up to Shabbos, but it's more than that. It doesn't just mean that everything was leading up to Shabbos, and Shabbos is the purpose of the world. It means that the message of Shabbos, which is Emunah, is the purpose of the world. Meaning, is the purpose for the world that Hashem created in 6 days. And it's a consciousness that's meant not just to enjoy on Shabbos itself, but to lock in through a proper experience of Shabbos. And I bless us all that mamish we should feel Shabbos ba'omek. Ba'omek, mamish for real. And that only happens through this kind of learning, because otherwise how should we feel anything about Shabbos if we know nothing about Shabbos? And I don't mean knowing what to do or what not to do. That's also important. We have to learn the halachas. But the panemius of the Torah, if we're mamish living Shabbos, Shabbos is intended to infuse the rest of the week with the Shabbos consciousness. So within all the malacha, and with all the work, and within all the things you're doing during the week that you can't do on Shabbos, Shabbos is the tachlis, maaseh shamayim va'aretz. The only reason there are 6 days is so that you should infuse your engagement with those 6 days, which is regular life as it were, with the energy and the spirit of Shabbos Kodesh. V'zeh b'chinas menucha. And he says this is the aspect of menucha, of rest, of comfort. Shehi b'chinas nevuah, which is an aspect of prophecy. Menucha is an aspect of prophecy. How does he know that? Beruach HaKodesh, and prophecy and also divine spirit. K'may shekasav, as the pasuk says, v'nachal of Ruach Hashem, that the Spirit of God rested upon him. V'nacha means rested upon. What Ruach Hashem? What rested upon him? Say Chazal, Ruach HaKodesh, Nevuah, prophecy. What word is used to refer to the spirit of prophecy coming down upon a person? V'nacha alav. A sense of comfort. Menucha, Melashin Menucha. It didn't like a torrent just come showering upon him. The spirit of prophecy comes, like we said about presence, like a whisper. Loi b'kol Hashem, loi b'rash Hashem. Right? Like Eliyahu Navi called the Mamadaka. It's true there's a Tardema. It's true. By Avram Avinu. It's true. But after that experience, that initial experience, which is just the barriers and not the thing itself, in the moment of inner, it's called the Mamadaka. It's something very calm. Something very, very, very gentle. Afterwards. Right after he says, I heard speaking voice called Mamadaka. Menucha, and of course Shabbos is the day of Menucha. That means that Shabbos must be the day of Nevuah, because that's what prophecy is, the deepest Menucha. V'chein darsha Chazal, and he brings another proof in the pasuk in Yirmiyahu, where Yirmiyahu complains. He says, Menucha le'matzasi, I haven't found Menucha. Says Rashi, what haven't you found? What Menucha didn't Yirmiyahu have? Says Rashi, Nevuah was taken away from him. How does Rashi know that? Because he says, I didn't have Menucha. What's Menucha? Nevuah. There's a deep bond between the concept of Menucha, specifically as it relates to the Menucha of Shabbos, about which the Medrash tells us, Ba Shabbos, Ba Menucha. Like Shabbos brought Menucha into the world. What's Menucha? Prophecy. There's a deep connection then between Shabbos and Nevuah. Ruach HaKodesh. You can see where this is going already. The prophetic worldview, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not hidden. See how he says it. He says this is what it means that on Shabbos we have an extra soul. What does it mean, an extra soul? What does that mean? What is this neshama yisera we hear about? What is neshama? So we first need to know what one soul means in order to then know what it means to have an extra one. But if neshama means that part of me that's in touch with the neshama of the world, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that part of me that understands that just like my body is only here to allow my neshama to express itself, the world is only here to allow the neshama of the world to express itself, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The neshama yisera means an extra infusion of that kind of perspective. An added infusion of soul. It means an added infusion of clarity into what life is about. Not to be fooled by this thing we call flesh and skin. Not to be fooled by it. And in the same way that we're not fooled by that, not to be fooled by this thing we call rain or sun or earth or fire. Neshama Yisera. The Menucha of Shabbos is the Nevuah of Shabbos. The prophet sees HaKadosh Baruch Hu panim b'panim. The prophet understands that within the silence, chash, within the silence, like Yeshayahu Navi sees, ma, the silence speaks. If you understand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't speak through WhatsApp, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't speak through an email, HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaks through nature, which He created with words. Chash mal. It's the speaking silence that Yecheskel sees after all the barriers. That's the prophecy of Shabbos. That's the menucha of Shabbos. That there's nothing more comforting than knowing that I don't have to climb to some kind of mountain to find the Kadosh Baruch Hu. I am swimming in Him. All of life is Him. The air that I breathe is Him. Meeting another Jew is Him. Learning something is Him. Thinking is Him. Ein oid milvade kipshutei mamish. Is there any deeper menucha? Where are you trying to go? You're already there. We need to open our eyes. This is the message of Shabbos. This is the neshama yisera of Shabbos, the menucha yisera of Shabbos. This is the nevuah yisera that Shabbos gives us. And that's why it's a me'ein of olam haba. He says that's why Shabbos is a little bit of a taste of the world to come. Because what does the pasuk say about the world to come? Sheyu kol am Hashem neviim. That the whole entire world will be prophets. As the pasuk says, v'nivu b'nechem u'v'naisechem. Your children, your sons and your daughters will mamish be neviim. That's what it says by olam haba. That's why Shabbos is a me'ein olam haba. Because on Shabbos, if we do Shabbos right, we can see through the fog. On Shabbos, we become a little bit like a Navi. On Shabbos, we're connecting to that spirit of Olam Haba where everybody will be Nevi'im. Let's turn very quickly to Rabbi Nachman on the second side of the page, very quickly. So I'm just running out of time. Rabbi Nachman says in the Kutumran Tinyana, Tarches, which is a very long and glorious Torah, and a very redemptive lesson. He says over there, he says when Nevuah will spread to the whole entire world, there will be the fixing of this thing we call imagination. Bebechinas, what does that have to do with prophecy? The pasuk in Hosea says, "Ubiyad hanavim adame." HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, by the way of the Nevi'im, I am imagined. Like the Rambam tells us, the whole thing of Nevuah was centered around the clarity of that capacity for imagination that the prophet had. All of us have this ability. Why do we have this ability? We don't need it for our physiological functioning. Why does one need to be able to imagine? We need to be afraid of things because we need to run away from things that are hurtful. We need to love things so that we can procreate and we can bring children to it. There are certain things that we need for being human. Why do we need imagination? Why is that necessary? In terms of this worldly conception of what it means to be a human being, what do we need imagination for? Says the Piasetzner Rebbe in all of his svarim and every word of his and every line, imagination is the most ruchnius capacity that you and I have. It's the most spiritual capacity we have, imagination. We need to use it in the right way. We need to use it in the right way. We need to cleanse our imagination. And that's what the Nevi'im did. And so, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu settled upon them that capacity of being able to imagine a brighter world, being able to imagine the way in which this world could mamish be seen as vibrating with Elokus, even though to our current locked-in, cemented way of viewing things, this is a wall, and this is a ceiling, and this is a floor, and if I were in speaking, this is silence, and those are cars, and that's a street. But the Nevi'im had imagination. They saw beyond the concrete reality. It's a joke. They saw beyond it. Biyad Nevi'im adame. Ukishenestakin hamedame. And when that capacity of imagination becomes rectified, he says that's when our faith will be complete. When we can walk through the world like little children again. Who mamish still know the secret of imagination. Not to be fooled by what we see, not to be locked in. This is the way it is. This is what the people think. This is what this one thinks. This is what that one's opinion is. This is this shul and that's that shul. This is a teenager and this is an adult. No. Sheker. There's something deeper to life. Something beyond it. And there's a way of using those experiences not as an obstacle to getting to the truth, but if we look at it properly, as the greatest gilui of the truth, of the Pnimius. And that's called faith. And he says just very quickly, Ki ikar ha'amuna tluya b'koyach hamadame. He says faith really depends on this capacity of imagination. Ki b'mesh ha'seichel mevin ein shayach emuna. What your mind could grasp, that's not faith. That's what you understand. That's called seichel. You get it. Makes sense to you. Rational, intellectual, fits. Ve'ikar emuna hu rak b'makim sha'seichel nifsak. But what about that place that you can't quite understand? What about that place that's beyond? What about that place that demands that we tap into something that's beyond the categories where we feel comfortable grasping or fully understanding completely the gamri? There, he says, that's what emunah starts. Sham srichem emunah. When our seichel ends, you know what begins? The power of imagination, the ability to imagine, the ability to allow our mind to frolic, to run free, even though the world looks the way the world looks. Ani ma'amin be'emuna shalema, bevias haMashiach. What does that mean, to believe that Mashiach can come? It means that I imagine that the world can be a brighter place. To believe is to imagine. To believe is to imagine. We don't have time to see the rest of it. I want to wrap up. Let's go back to the Sefas Emes, but take the sheets with you. That taka is translated on Sefaria, so you can find it and go through the rest of the piece, really go through the whole Torah and go through the whole Likutei Moharan and go through everything. And Be'ez Hashem will learn it all together on Sefaria and in other places. Let's take a look at the last two paragraphs. V'lachein, he says, that's why, with this we come to an end. B'Shabbos ne'esar ha'malacha. That's why Shabbos is asur in malacha. Why are we not allowed to do malacha on Shabbos? Why? Because it's a day of rest. That's very sweet. But tell me something deeper than that. Tell me something more than that. What is malacha and what is Shabbos? And why can't I do this thing called malacha on this thing called Shabbos? What's the omek of it? What's the depth? B'nai Yisrael, he says it's asur for the B'nai Yisrael on Shabbos to do malacha. Why? Ki tachlis ha-malacha v'ha-ma'aseh liyas kli sheyichal ha-kedusha. He says, what's the purpose of malacha? What's the purpose of bringing something into the world? What's the purpose of producing something, taking 5 blocks of wood and turning it into this thing we call a table? What's the purpose of that? The purpose of creation and our role in it, developing the world, is to enable another vessel to be here that can allow the Spirit of Hashem to manifest through it. Because Hashem, again, is revealed through creation. So the more that we add on to creation, the more that we build, and the more that we develop the world that Hashem wants us to develop, L'Tov bara, the Pasuk says, Hashem doesn't want the world to be devoid of life. L'Sefas Yitzara, Hashem wants us to settle. Al tikar banayich l'boy noich. Hashem, Adam, ayin lavedes Adama. There was no person to develop the land. Hashem wants us to build. But that's the 6 days of the week. Shabbos is the infusion of the essence which all of creation is meant to convey. And so on Shabbos, we stop malacha, we put on the glasses of pnimius, of emunah, of imagination, of prophecy, of nevuah, and then we look upon this thing called nature. Everything that we did, all of our malacha during the week, and we see it as being a vessel where if we know how to look in the vessel, al tistakel b'kankan, ela ma sheyesh bai, not just to look at what the externals are, to peer over the rim of life. To peer over the rim. And to see ma sheyesh bai, what's inside. That's Shabbos. Shabbos is the toichen hapnimi. That's what's inside. And in this sense, all the days of the week were a preparation for Shabbos, but not disassociated from it. All these days of the week, and then finally I could relax. No, that's not what it is. It's that finally the stage is set for the performer to come on stage. On stage, utilizing the stage that has been set for Shabbos to do its pu'ula. It's a very different way of looking at Shabbos, at everything. Yemei Amaisa Hachana l'Shabbos. They're a preparation for Shabbos. V'ayidei Malacha Histalkus Ruach HaKodesh. And if we're continuing to do Malacha, so that's gonna take away from this one day a week where we're mamish able to be the aspect of a prophet, to sit back where all your work is done, Kol Malachtecha Asuya, and now I can look upon the world with the right eyes. V'nikra Chilul Shabbos, and that's going to be called a Chilul Shabbos, which is really a vacancy of Shabbos. Because Chilul is Milashon Chalal, just the void, without seeing what's in it. That's why Shabbos comes, Nigmar Malacha. So that's why we needed everything to be created, because of Shabbos. And with this we'll end. This is what the Zohar Kodesh says in Bereshis. This word Bereshis is the letters Yarei Shabbos. Yarei is an aspect of Yira Shamayim, awe, to be aware of the presence of Hashem, to be feeling overwhelmed by the grandeur of a Kodesh Baruch Hu revealed within the world. That's Yira, awe, and Shabbos. And also Yarei Boishes, also the letters of Bereshis, which means fear and a certain level of shame. When does a person feel shame? When they don't match up to a certain expectation, when they don't reach the place where they really expected they should be reaching. They don't measure up, and it's exposed to other people. It's very embarrassing. So he doesn't mean that we should mamish walk around and feel, I'm so not adarab. We already have 3 shiurim on Shabbos, gives us our self-esteem. 3 different very deep ways. Not that. On the contrary, he says, Yari Boishes, Shabbos gives us a glimpse of how we could be living. Shabbos sets the bar very high. Not because it's unattainable, so then we go back into the week and we say, Tachla, who was I fooling? Who was I fooling? L'chadoidi, I was mamish, davening. Who was I fooling? I mean, look at me. I'm just fill in the blank. Look at me. He says, no. Because the Pnimius of Shabbos reveals the inner depth of who you actually are. Sets the bar high because it's a bar we can reach. Teaches us how to look at the week. Teaches us how to march into the week. Not feeling like we need to run away from the world. We run into the world because in the world is where God is hidden. The whole purpose of Yiddishkeit is that it's an exercise in allowing the body to become nullified to the inner depth. Befrat ish Yisrael, specifically a Jew, sheyesh lechelik b'Shabbos Kodesh, who of course is very bound with the essence of Shabbos. Just want to read you 3 lines of English and then we'll finish. Just turn to the other side of the page. This is something that I wrote a while ago, and just in preparation for the shiur, I remembered it and I brought it onto this piece of paper. And with them, we'll finish, and then we'll mamish fabreg and we'll sing together. And whoever can stay, and whoever can't, we love you. It says like this. Rabbi Nachman writes that Emunah relies on the koyach hamadame, the capacity of imagination. Who has a stronger imagination than a child? Who is more full of faith than a child? Is there anything more youthful than Emunah? Than an ideal of holiness? Than the distant vision of a world bursting with the presence of Hashem? Biyad hanavim adame. Only an imaginative, youthful person can be a prophet. B'nei neviim heim, says Hillel. We are a nation of prophetic youngsters. How's that a name for a band, huh? The prophetic youngsters. And start like an orchestra without just our chevra, prophetic youngsters. This is our nation, chevra. Because only a person with the dream still alive in his heart can hope to move our world into an impossibly beautiful future. This is it. This is our generation. This is our task. Specifically us. Chevra that have the privilege, because there are thousands of learning programs this Thursday night all over the world, and I'm sure here in London, and people are learning, and it's a gewalt. But maybe people need at least one night a week where they're learning something different than they're learning the rest of the week. Where it's not another sugya and halacha, and it's not another, it's not the how, what, where, and when, but it's the soul of it. Why are we doing all this stuff? One night a week can change everything. Everything. And this is something that we mamish need to be doing, chevra. We need to take achrayus for this. I'm new here. I don't know anybody almost. I'm trying, slowly but surely. But this is something that we need to let people know, because the people are drowning. Adults and kids and women and children and everybody. And I am not the answer. It's not me. This is the answer. And I know that because this was the answer for me. And you know that because I think you're getting the sense that this may be the answer for you. Sense of achrayus. Be youthful, be imaginative, be young, be full of life. Be'ezer Hashem. Anachnu dar mitzuyan. This is an amazing generation. They just do not know it yet. Shabbos, good Shabbos. Thank you so much for joining everybody on Zoom and on Facebook and everywhere else. Have a wonderful Shabbos.